Good morning, and thank you for joining today's webinar on Advocacy 101. I am Kanika Young. I'm the Senior Director of Health Policy and Advocacy at the Tennessee Justice Center, and we are grateful to our co-host, the Equity Alliance, for today's webinar. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. The webinar is being recorded, and we will email a copy of the slides to everyone afterwards. Also, if you have a question during the presentation, feel free to submit that in the chat box, and we will try to answer those questions as we go along. Even though we are virtual, we want to make it as interactive as possible, so feel free to submit those questions along the way. And I see that Ray Carroll Woodard, sorry, from the Equity Alliance has joined us. So Ray Carroll, do you want to say hello and just a little bit about the Equity Alliance?
Hello, everybody. Sorry, I'm happy to be here and excited to be here. Thank you, Tennessee Justice. This is great. I hope we have a lot of folks on the call today because I promise you we have reached out to a lot of folks. But the Equity Alliance, if you don't know about us, we are a 501c3 nonprofit that is about the making sure that we have equity in the Black and Brown communities. And so we do that by specifically engaging the communities, but also educating and enhancing each community. So I'm excited to be here and I'm excited to get some training going. Thank you, Kanika.
Thanks, Ray Carroll. Thanks for joining us today. So we will go ahead and jump in with our presentation today. So I want to start out with a poll just to gauge the audience here today. So I'm going to launch the first poll. So you should see that pop up on your screen. The question is, have you ever spoken up about something that wasn't right to get it fixed, or spoken up to stop something that would be harmful from happening? So I'll give folks a minute or two to respond to that question. So it looks like we've gotten a good number of the votes in, and looks like 100% of you actually have done these things. So congratulations, you are already advocates. We hope today to talk a little bit more about how to be effective as an advocate, but it looks like you are already on the road to being advocates. And so what is advocacy? Basically, it's using your voice. If you've ever spoken up about something that wasn't right to get it fixed, or spoken up to stop something from happening that would be harmful, then you are an advocate. The key to advocacy is speaking with people who have the power to do something about it. So if you're just complaining about things that are wrong in your community or in your region or state, and not directing those comments to people who could actually change those things, then you're not advocating. You're basically just complaining. So it's really important to identify who the decision makers are that can influence the situation that you're trying to change, and really showing them why they should be in support of or opposed to the thing that you are speaking about. So some common advocacy strategies. We at the Tennessee Justice Center use a combination of grassroots organizing and grass tops organizing. And I'll just explain the difference between those two. So when you think of grassroots organizing, that is organizing people at the community level. So they are your neighbors, your friends, your coworkers, just your average person who lives in a community who's impacted by an issue. You focus your efforts on educating them about the issue, discussing potential solutions with them, and really getting them organized to speak out about that issue to their decision makers. Grass tops organizing, on the other hand, is focusing those same efforts on leaders within the community. So when you think about people such as pastors of a church or presidents of a nonprofit organization or doctors who run a practice, they have some sort of influence over another group of people. And so the idea would be to get those leaders engaged in the organizing effort so that they can then share information with the people that follow them. Some common strategies when communicating with legislators include sending letters, making calls, scheduling meetings, and doing symbolic actions such as marches or sit-ins and that sort of thing. Another key element to advocacy is media coverage. We try to get what's called earned media. That's where a newspaper or a radio station run some kind of content that your organization has participated in creating. And so that will elevate the issues that you're trying to get the public engaged around and educated about. Op-eds is another powerful tool that we use to share information. That is shorthand for opinion editorial. It's where someone who has knowledge about a subject matter writes a short article and submits it to the newspaper to run for their readers. Letters to the editor are similar, except they're shorter and they don't necessarily have to be from someone who has expertise about the subject matter. It could just be from a citizen who typically they may see something in the newspaper that sparks their interest, or they have a reaction to it and they want to share that reaction with the editor of the newsletter or the newspaper. So those are letters to the editor, which we sometimes refer to as LTEs. And then another important form of media nowadays is social media. That's a really good platform to reach a lot of people and get your message out about the issue that you care about. And so we'll talk a little bit more about each of these things later. And then the next really key element of advocacy in terms of strategies is storytelling. And so I want to launch the next poll just to get your feedback about storytelling. So I'm going to launch that poll now. Hopefully you see it on your screen. And the question is, what are some benefits of sharing personal stories when advocating? The options are showing the impact of policy on people's lives, connecting with others who have similar experiences, raising awareness about an issue, or all of the above. So I'll just give you guys a couple of more seconds to respond to this poll and we'll see what you think. Okay, it looks like most people have voted, so I will end that poll and share the results. And over 90% of you guys said all of the above. Yes, you are correct. All of these are really important reasons and benefits of sharing personal stories when advocating. So I will stop that and continue with the slides. So storytelling is an effective way of communicating with decision makers. It's a way to put a personal face on the issue that you're trying to educate the decision maker about. It's a way to build a relationship and connect with the elected representative, and it's a key way to persuade them about an issue. Typically, when we are sharing stories with decision makers at the Tennessee Justice Center, we try to get people who are enrolled in our state's Medicaid program, which is called TennCare. A lot of our work is centered around protecting access to health care for low-income people, people with disabilities, and older adults. And so we try to engage those people who are directly benefiting from the program to share their stories with policymakers For example, if they are considering making some kind of harmful change to the program that would impact the people who are enrolled. Another key way that we use stories at TJC is getting the stories of people who are in what's called the coverage gap. And that is people who don't qualify for our Medicaid program and they cannot afford to buy a private plan on the healthcare exchange, the Obamacare plans. And so highlighting the stories of people who are in the coverage gap is a really strong way to send a message to our leaders that by refusing to expand Medicaid in our state, you are hurting real people. And here's the stories of those people. So, storytelling, relationships, making concise arguments are all very important to communicate with decision makers. Really want to stress that talking with representatives absolutely does work. And they are really listening now because we have an election coming up. So we want to make sure people realize that they hold the power. You put these representatives into office, you also have the power to replace them. So if you are raising your voice and trying to let them know how you feel about issues impacting you, your family, and your community, and they aren't listening, then you hold the power to do something about that. So, a couple of things to focus on when you're sharing your stories with decision makers is to make it personal and use I statements to influence them about how policies impact real people. Focus on the heart, not the head. That means there's a place for statistics and data and factual information along those lines, but you want to make that emotional connection with the decision maker as well so they understand how their decisions really influence and impact your life. You want to try to include a shared moral or value. Some of the topics that we advocate around are really divisive political issues. Although healthcare, I don't think should be a political issue. That's one of our main focuses at TJC. But for whatever reasons, it has become politicized. But including a shared moral or value, such as everyone should be able to get medical treatment when they need it. I think most people would agree with that, that people should not be suffering or in pain, especially in a country that is as wealthy as the United States. So trying to connect on that shared moral or value is a really good way to communicate about issues with your decision makers. And then also, we recommend making a single ask when you have those communications with decision makers. If you demand too much at one time, they may get bogged down and lost in your points and just not agree with you on anything. Or you may ask for three different things and they agree with you on one of those things, but because you've added those other two that they don't agree with, you may not get that one thing that they do agree on. So you want to try to focus on a single ask that you're wanting the decision maker to act on. And don't forget to submit questions in the Q&A or in the chat box if you have them as we're going. So a little bit more about stories. Stories are really our most compelling content for digital organizing, which is more important today than it was previously because of the pandemic. When you can't gather in groups and have community meetings, we have to rely a lot on websites and social media and emails and other digital organizing tools. And the way to get people to stop and open your or read your email or click on your social media post is to include stories and particularly to include pictures. People, kind of can sail past just words on a screen, but if they see a picture of a person, they're more likely to stop and read the content and pay attention to what you're talking about. So remember, numbers don't win people's hearts. It's the personal stories and the connections that really make people understand and put themselves in other people's shoes on an issue. Firsthand storytelling, that can happen through op-eds. Again, that's opinion editorials, LTE, our letters to the editor, and social media accounts. And these are great to be amplified by other groups and organizations. We oftentimes say there's power in numbers. So if you find other groups or organizations that align on the issue that you care about, reaching out to them and asking them to share your content is a great way to spread that message to more people. One example that we'll give here about the power of stories and also the power of partnering with other groups concerns the Katie Beckett waiver. Katie Beckett is a program that's named after a little girl who lived in Iowa who developed a really severe brain infection when she was young, and it caused some really long-term disabilities. And while she was in the hospital, her state covered her medical expenses, which were really high because of her condition. They covered that through their Medicaid program. But once she was well enough to go home, she would lose that Medicaid coverage because her parents' income was too high to qualify for Medicaid. And so Katie Beckett's family, her parents, wrote to then President Ronald Reagan and explained the situation and said, it really doesn't make sense for you to cover the cost of her care when she's in the hospital, which can be higher than what it would cost to care for her at home, but not cover those costs at a lower level and allow her to be home with her family where it's proven that people do better when they're with family versus being confined in a hospital for the rest of their lives. And so they explained that so President Reagan presented that dilemma, and he created the Katie Beckett waiver program, which states can adopt to provide Medicaid coverage to children specifically who have significant healthcare needs, regardless of their parents' income. And so Tennessee was one of really the only state in the country that had not adopted some form of the Katie Beckett waiver. But that changed in 2019 through the advocacy work of the Tennessee Disability Coalition as well as the Tennessee Justice Center. We at TJC work with families who need help navigating the healthcare system and getting access to what they need. And we have been talking with families over the years who fell into this category of their children having really significant healthcare needs, but they didn't qualify for our Medicaid program because of the parents' income. And so we had been collecting information about families who would benefit from the program if Tennessee were to adopt it. And once the opportunity presented itself, we connected those families with the Tennessee Disability Coalition, who really took the lead in organizing them to meet with lawmakers to share their stories with the newspaper. And those stories caught the attention of legislators in our state who then decided to champion a Katie Beckett waiver program. And so that was passed in 2019, and it was the first really significant expansion of our Medicaid program in years to benefit about 3,000 children in the state who otherwise would not have access to the comprehensive care that they need. So that's a victory that we are really excited about. So best ways to contact representatives. A lot of people use phone calls. It's important when you're calling your representatives to be respectful, explain that you are a constituent. So you can say, hi, I'm Kanika Young. I live in District 19, which is my Senate district, and here's the issue that I am concerned about. You want to keep it simple and brief. And people may be surprised to know that legislators have staff people who definitely answer their phones and they make notes about what people are calling about. They don't necessarily receive a whole lot of phone calls. So when they do receive those calls, it stands out to them and they pay attention. Candidate forums is another good way to contact representatives, especially during the election season. You find candidates holding those forums somewhat as a campaign event, but also to hear from the constituents and find out what people care about and what issues they should be pushing for if they were elected. So if you have the opportunity to speak at a candidate forum, you want to introduce yourself, thank them for being there, tell a brief story and make it personal to the district that that person would be representing, and make a clear and direct ask of them. So what do you do if the representative is not agreeing? First is to listen. Try to figure out what is it that they have a problem with or disagreement about. You want to acknowledge their complaint or disagreement and provide real information to counter that if you have it. The goal is to find the lowest common denominator to achieve the best results. So figure out what is the thing at its core that you guys agree about and try to move towards making that actionable. Share real experiences and stories, and the key is don't give up. Going back to the Katie Beckett waiver example, the Tennessee Disability Coalition and the Tennessee Justice Center have been partnering on this effort for many years to try to make it happen, and we didn't give up. And an opportunity presented itself in 2019, and we decided to run with it and make another push to make this happen, and it worked. So even if you're not successful, you may be able to reduce the intensity of the representative's opposition or deter them from working hard against you. This can be crucial. Sometimes it's necessary to try to make small progress or incremental steps towards the goal, and that is something. It's better than nothing a lot of times. So don't give up, be persistent, and be respectful so that when you go back to them that next time, you haven't burned bridges. So the big picture, people speaking out in local districts absolutely matters. Candidates are really listening before elections, as I mentioned before, because they're trying to win your vote. So it may be that they get in office and they disappoint you. They don't do what they promised to do. But that if you've gone on record in voicing what the constituents in the district want, and then that person makes promises and doesn't deliver, then you have information and material that you can use for the next election to say you didn't do what you promised during the last election, so we're voting you out to get someone who is going to listen. So it's still important to engage in that process, even if you have starts and stops along the way. Even hearing from one person can make a difference. You may be surprised to hear that legislators, after hearing from one person that had a really powerful or moving story, they decided to sponsor some key piece of legislation. That happens more often than not. So don't think, oh, I'm just one person, I don't make a difference. You absolutely can make a difference. Local newspapers. I know newspaper is a dying industry these days, but elected officials still read them. There are still a few papers that produce content, and they rely on that to figure out what's happening on the streets that people are talking about and care about. You want to visit the website, if they have one, of the local newspaper and find out how to submit an op-ed or LTE. I know here in Nashville, the Tennessean is our main paper, and they have information on their website about the word counts and just some parameters for submitting those LCEs and op-eds. So you want to check that out. You also, if you are engaged in advocacy in any significant way, it's important to have relationships with reporters. We have contacted healthcare reporters specifically when we want them to look into a story about a healthcare issue, and they have been really good allies to share information with the public. Reporters are unbiased, they're neutral, and so you want to make sure that they are getting factual information to share with the public, because they are a trusted resource of information in the community, usually. Although our current administration is kind of doing all they can to erode that trust of news reporters, but we still look to them as resources of information, and we want to continue that. Media coverage, again, so for op-eds, 300 to 500 words is the usual rule of thumb for opinion editorials, and they ask that you show expertise on a timely topic. If you have an issue that you care about and you want someone with authority to speak about it, then an op-ed may be a good ask of someone to write that in, or you can help them by providing information for them to include in that op-ed and submit it on behalf of your issue. They usually ask for a headshot and a short bio just to note that the person is an expert or an authority on the topic. Letters to the editor can be shorter, usually 250 words or less, and they are one of the most frequently read sections in the newspaper for those who still read them. And they can either respond to a timely news item or topic, or show editors what readers will be interested in, and that will lead them to cover that topic in the future. So a little bit more about media coverage. Call-in radio shows is another option depending on where you live. If radio is popular there, and if you're going to be calling into the show, we just recommend that you make notes and organize your thoughts and review them so that you can speak clearly and intelligently about the issue. Um, just a couple of tips there. Again, we'll be sending a copy of the slides, so you don't have to worry about taking a whole lot of notes. But just a few tips for calling in to radio shows. Call early, know what you want to say, be aware of the delay in terms of the broadcast delay. And while you're on the air, stay focused and calm, and don't argue or sound angry, because it's easy for people to dismiss your arguments if you come across as being irrational or irate. So digital organizing, as I mentioned before, this is really important these days because we're not necessarily doing big gatherings. And so it's a good way to stay in touch with people who may care about the issues that you're concerned about. Facebook, just to note a few differences across the different platforms, we find that Facebook is more for older users, but it's actually the easiest tool for organizing. Um, Instagram is more catered to younger users, and it's largely photo driven. So this may be a good platform to share those stories that we talked about before. And then Twitter, this is for high volume of posts, and it's best for connecting with reporters and following news trends and posting about breaking news. And we'll talk a little bit more about each of these platforms. So first, Facebook. We think Facebook is great for digital organizing for several reasons. One is because of the private Facebook groups that exist. This is a really good way to connect local groups of people who care about a certain issue. Again, I'll use the Katie Beckett waiver as an example. There were Facebook groups created for families who would benefit from the program, and it was a good way to post information about what was happening along the way with the advocacy for the legislation, and really to help families to find a sense of community and to connect with people who were struggling with the same things that they were struggling with, to share tips to help them to get by while they were advocating for a change in this program. Another feature of Facebook that's helpful for advocacy is doing videos, posting videos, or doing Facebook Live events. Videos tend to go further than other posts, but it's important to keep them short. People's attention spans, especially these days with all the things that are happening that can really be exhausting for people to try to keep up with and fight about. So we want to keep them short and keep people engaged in those issues. Facebook Live is good for longer events. So for example, if you host a press conference or a town hall event and you want to share that message with people who may not be there in person, it's good to broadcast that on Facebook Live and have people follow along with the content there who may not be there in person. Other posts, photos are really key, especially photos of people's faces. Again, if you're scrolling through your news feed, you're more likely to pause and stop when you see a photo. And it's also good to create shareable images, especially if you're sharing data or graphics about with numbers. Canva is a resource that you can use. You can have a free account there, and it's pretty user friendly, where you can create flyers or graphics about your topic to post on social media or to include in your emails. Sharing posts and getting others to share um, is really a great way to make your message go further. We recommend that if you care about healthcare access and nutrition support for people who need help with food insecurity, I encourage you to follow TJC's Facebook page and share our posts because we post a lot of content about those issues. And also the Equity Alliance has great Facebook content as well. So Instagram, again, great for sharing photos and short videos and telling stories. We recommend posting no more than once a day on Instagram just because of the way that their algorithms are set up. As an organization, you're penalized if you post too much. They like don't show as much in people's news feeds. So just a little pro tip there. You can easily link your Instagram to Facebook. So when you post to one, it also sends the same content to the other. Um, Instagram is not especially good for sharing links except on Instagram stories, but remember that they expire. So you should save them to your highlights if you would like them to stay on your profile. So then Twitter, we use Twitter often if we're trying to live tweet during events. So if you're hosting like a panel discussion or a press conference and you have written talking points or you've received drafts of what the speakers plan to say, you can use those to kind of draft those tweets ahead of time, and it makes it easier to post them in real time as the event is happening. The shorter the better for tweets, and include photo and video if possible. Use hashtags that are popular. When we are launching a campaign, we'll do a search for something that we are thinking about using as a hashtag, just to make sure that some other campaign or organization hasn't already used that, because we don't want to confuse people about what our message is. So creating unique hashtags is a good tip, but also using common hashtags that are popular and putting those on your post will make them go further and be seen by more people who are following those popular hashtags. And tagging accounts if they're relevant to your post. A lot of times, if we're posting something advocating to a specific legislator or a congressperson, then we'll tag that person's account so that they see it in their Twitter account. So a little bit more about TJC's work. We do individual casework helping families navigate our healthcare and food assistance programs in the state. And we take what we learn from those individual cases to identify systemic issues or things that are really common problems that people are encountering over and over again. And we try to work on changing those things to help more people. And we also do training and technical assistance for other organizations that are working with community members and providing direct services. And then advocacy, of course, we do a lot of advocacy using litigation, using lobbying, using grassroots organizing, grass tops organizing to try to move our decision makers to understand what people in Tennessee are dealing with, and how our systems can be improved to better help families. I want to open the floor up again for any questions that people may have. So if you have a question, feel free to type it in. And if not, then we will conclude our presentation and say thank you. On this page, we have our social media platforms, so Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, as well as our website that has a lot of good information. One question that was submitted: is there a good place to get photos for Instagram? I'm assuming that you're talking about like free images or stock photos. If that's the case, then there are a few websites. I don't have the names of them off the top of my head. There's something like I'm trying to think of what the site is, but there are websites that have free stock images. So I think if you Google free stock images, that will be a way to get them. But we actually use photos of real people, like our clients, or our our staff people when we're posting on social media. So I think it's important to have photos of people, actual Tennesseans or people who you're talking about to resonate with your followers. So that's what I would recommend. Um, any other questions? Ray Carol, did you want to say anything before we end?
Please follow our website at www.theequityalliance.org, and you can volunteer with us. Of course, November 3rd is very important, and so we are doing a huge push with our organizers to get folks registered to vote, but also making sure that you not only take yourself, but take your family, your friends. We're urging everyone to take at least 5 folks to the polls this year. So we thank you for the voting on November 3rd, but early voting is important. And early voting for us in Tennessee starts October 14th through the 28th. So early vote or vote on election day. We just need you to be a proud and faithful voter. And thank you, Tennessee Justice, for partnering with us. And was great work, Kanika. Thank you guys.
Thanks, Ray Carol. And I will be sure to share the Equity Alliance webpage and information for you guys in the follow-up email along with a copy of the slides. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. You can respond to the email that I send for the follow-up, and we will look forward to connecting with you across all these different platforms. So thank you guys. Take care.
Thank you.